male and female, reclaim their power, build unwavering confidence, develop their support system, and set healthy boundaries. You can find me online anywhere, Danielle Shea blog. But Instagram is the best place to find me. So that's going to be at Danielle Shea blog, DanielleSheablog on Instagram.
So let's jump right into it. So take us from the genesis. You mentioned that you're a sexual assault survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into how it happened, was it someone that was familiar to you, or was this like a stranger?
Yeah, so for me, and it kind of goes with the story, right? So I'm happy to jump into that. And for anyone listening, know that I do my best. I work with survivors all day long, all around the world, and I understand what it means to be on the side of the listener. And so please know that I am very selective of the words that I use, the way in which I tell my story. If you want to find out more about it, it is online, it does exist, the whole long thing. But just for the context of this, I'll keep it short so people can really hear and kind of understand what's, just to set context for us. So, my first abuse, and I think that that's a really important note to make, is many sexual abuse survivors, they don't just experience it once, they experience it many times. So, my first abuse happened with a stranger, and I was drugged at a party, and they had sex with me without my consent. And that is the phrase that I will use in order to explain this. And so, I was a college student, I was underage drinking, and I had set my drink down, which they tell you never to do. But I was at a house, I was with people. I wasn't like out at a bar, I wasn't out like doing things like this. We're at a kickback. This is a setting I'd been in many times, and it was towards the end of my freshman year. And so the only reason that I know that I was drugged was because I had lots of hallucinations that night, and I woke up, the next day not feeling hungover, just feeling like, where am I and what happened and like what's going on. And so that was really the impetus for a lot of other things that happened in my life, and other abuse and other things that I allowed to happen as well. Because while my experience was not my fault, and this is true for anyone who's experienced sexual abuse, no matter what age, what you were wearing, what you were doing, that was not your fault. And also, your healing is your responsibility, right? And so there are lots of things that I did in my deep healing, which were coping mechanisms, which I'm putting in air quotes here, which looked a lot like substance abuse and hypersexuality and putting myself into dangerous situations that I had no business being in. But the reason I was doing those things was I was trying to find a sense of control, trying to find a sense of power, and looking for ways to destroy myself. Because if someone thought that I meant nothing and that they were able to do this to me, and then other people were also able to do that, then surely that must be true. I must be worthless. I must not mean anything. And so that hopelessness, that helplessness that comes with trauma, but specifically this very intimate type of trauma, which takes away innocence, it takes away hope, it takes away your belief in humanity, really led me down this dark path, which I always tell people, whatever you did on your healing journey, I probably did too. So there's no judgment here, because it was sex, it was drugs, it was alcohol, it was all of the things. And I'm lucky that even worse things didn't happen, because I surely was putting myself in the war path for that to occur. There was many days where I just didn't want to be here and was very uh in the mindset of, I don't even need to be here anymore. And so, another day, sitting in, probably hadn't showered in 4 days, on the mattress floor of my college apartment, just realized like I need help. And I did that through a lot of different ways, and the privilege that I had with my support system and people who cared about me and who believed me and acknowledged what I had been through, and then helped me go through that. And now we've come full circle, and I get to help other people walk through their dark tunnel.
I look back at colleges and universities, and it seems that the opportunity to do that to someone is so available because you have probably a number of people who is their first time away from their parents. They're either
Hmm.
living on campus or they're renting out, let's say, a condo or a house very close to where the campus is, right? The school.
Yeah.
I remember going there to my college, my university, sorry. I was that person that hung out with the older kids. So I would like get snuck in and I would sneak into the parties and things like that. And I would see a lot of people, right? Where two birds of a feather. So birds of a feather, right? So it looked like to me, I didn't necessarily understand what was going on at the time, but when I look back, I was like, okay, this is what it could be because you have people who are doing all kinds of substances, right? Either some type of drugs or alcohol, and it's isn't ever a reason to take advantage of someone, but there are times where that person who's consuming these things, they don't have the capacity to say yes, and many times they don't have the capacity to say no.
Yeah.
And there is going to be that person that's going to take advantage of their inability to say yes or no, because there's some people that no answer means a yes,
Yeah.
right? And there's some people that no answer means a no. So when you look back on that specific situation and
Mhm.
you've come full circle and you've been able to help the women that you're helping now, do you see some of yourself back then in the women that you're assisting today?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify as well. I help men too. 100% of my clients last year were male. And that's not necessarily something I sought out to do, but I'm so honored and privileged to be able to support my male clients and the the different and unique way in which they experience this abuse and in which they heal from it as well. And so while there's many similarities, there's also very important differences in anyone's healing story and in the uniqueness that comes with your own healing journey. Because while this is a universal experience, because it happens everywhere, it doesn't care about your race or your gender or your demographic of any kind, right? It can happen to anyone in any kind of setting. And so there's a uniqueness to that, but most definitely. And I think that any kind of person who does some healing work, whether like even a life coach, right? Like if you're a life coach, and that's more of the perspective that I take it from, is not from a therapeutic perspective or from a life coaching perspective. Like you are helping people do healing work, keeping themselves accountable, developing self-awareness and understanding who they are and what they want out of life. And so when you do that, you also have to make sure that you yourself are healed enough in a way, because I don't believe that we're done healing. We're constantly evolving and growing and changing, but healed enough where that similarity that will inevitably come up with your clients doesn't trigger you and send you in a spiral where you're not able to support them. But yes, definitely just that vulnerability, that before and after that comes with a traumatic event of any kind, is there's always a before and there's always an after, and you tend to define your life kind of by that point of who you were before that and who you were after that. And so that innocence, that vulnerability, it really feels like it's just taken away from you. And so seeing people go through that, there's definitely those similarities there, and that naivete that I wish we all could keep, and that feels very pessimistic when you have to say like, oh, I didn't think that this actually happened to people, right? Because I didn't know anyone who it happened to, or I didn't think it could happen to me, right? I wish that that could be true.
I will share a story about that. It was my first time living on my own, and I
Mm-hmm.
moved in the downtown area of the city I live in. And let me tell you, Danielle, I felt like a superstar. I was renting out this condo, it was right by the water. I was like catnip to women, okay? I was just so free, right? And I loved it because it was my rules, which at that age in your 20s, there are no rules. And I was going to school and I was working and I had a good job and I was going to a good school. And then I remember there's a time where someone invited me over as I was grocery shopping and I brought my friends over and it was like a party. It was like 10 o'clock. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always made this joke now in my 30s that If anyone invites you over to your house at after 10 p.m., there's a specific reason, right? But
Yeah.
I brought my friend, and my secret password is pineapple for those who want to know and protect me. And what I did is that the person gave me something to drink, and I wasn't really a drinker there, but because I was living on my own, I started to develop that habit of drinking. Maybe within, let's say, an hour, all I remember is waking up in my place. So
Mhm.
there's a time gap, right? And then as I woke up, I was surprised that I couldn't remember what was going on. And then I look over, see this woman there. So now I'm freaking out, right? Because I don't know necessarily what happened. And I look at some people who are going through that. Is one of the probably scariest parts that I had was I didn't know what happened. And there's someone that I really don't know that's laying next to me.
Yeah.
And you begin to wonder what the hell just happened, right?
Yeah.
And as I look at some of the women that I speak to, and a little bit some of the men, when they tell me their stories, the general consensus seems to be that their biggest roadblock in overcoming it, or the source of trauma, was that they were powerless to protect themselves in that situation. Is
Yeah.
that a commonality that you find with the men and the women, or maybe even in your situation that you deal with?
Yeah. My one of my biggest well, not my biggest programs, but one of my programs is called Reclaim Your Power: Three Pillars to Healing from Sexual Trauma, because of that powerlessness. It is one of the most common themes. There's actually five that I talk about in that masterclass, that the five most common symptoms that sexual abuse survivors face. And that powerlessness is a through point for everyone that I talk to. And it's a big reason, because this type of trauma as well, it's not about sex, it's not about desire, it's about power. It's about control. And so when you're on the opposite side of that, and you are not the powerful one, and you were not in control in that situation, it changes your perspective on the world. It changes your perspective of yourself and the way that you're even able to handle situations. And it also changes your perspective on how you are going to advocate for yourself in the future, because this is a crime. And this was something we were talking off camera, that occurs. And it's a crime. And I think we need to identify and notice that. And so when that powerlessness comes, it takes away your voice. Because even if you do try to go and tell people, they might say that they don't believe you. You might never even tell people this story because of that fear of that repercussion. Because if this happened, and if that person was capable of doing this, then what else are they capable of doing if I speak up, if I try to get help, if I try to get that support? And so it's that questioning, that lack of control, that powerlessness that really does keep people in that rut. You're absolutely correct.
Why do you think that there's still some people out there that maybe believe that it's not a crime and that it is something else?
Yeah. So I was actually having a conversation. I was being interviewed for another podcast, and it was with someone who had never experienced this type of abuse. And you can always tell the people where it's on their heart, either if they've experienced it or if someone very close to them has experienced it, because the way that they talk about it is very different. And I think that that's true for many cases. Let's say cancer, for example. You might have never done a cancer walk in your life, but the second you know someone who does, like, you're there, you're signing petitions, you're doing things, right? And because it's that cause hasn't hit your heart, or it hasn't been something that's been in your sphere, and therefore it's something that we kind of ignore. And so I was having this conversation with this person, and they were asking me a lot of questions that felt uneducated. And the way that I say that is because, again, they hadn't experienced this, so they're in the mindset of like, I can't even fathom that someone would do this to other people. So they were asking me questions like, well, what is consent, and what does that mean, and doesn't consent take away like the spontaneity of things? And I'm like, we are talking about two separate things. Like, you are talking about two people who have a rapport, who have communicated with each other, who have been like yes, enthusiastically, like, let's get it on, let's do things. And I am talking about a very, very, very different situation, which is the polar opposite of the conversation that you're trying to have. And so it was coming together to bridge that gap of knowledge. So I think it's a lack of education. I think it's a lack of, again, perspective in your own experience. We can only hold so much in this beautiful brain of ours, of in our awareness.